Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Tiff and today's video is going to be a review of the Mazda CX-60 Takumi plug-in hybrid, and the question we're asking today is it worth the near £50,000 price tag? Hope you enjoy. So then, in the lovely setting of the Black Mountain roads, we can move on to our exterior and interior tour section of the review. Now obviously the exterior, each to their own, but I really do quite like the styling that Mazda have gone with in their design language, and I love this metallic red paint. It really does suit the vehicle. The trim level of this vehicle is Takumi, which means you get the big wheels, and it is the top spec with all of the goodies, including a really plush interior. 2.5 litre plug-in hybrid variant. You get this lovely twin panoramic roof. It's a shame it has the bar in the middle, but obviously that's for rollover protection, and with just the push of a button you can cover this, so it's completely opaque if it's too hot for you or too bright. Really does make the cabin feel airier, teamed with this lovely light cream leather. Now this front seat, we've moved all the way back to show just how capacious this is. I still got a fair bit of leg, well I say a fair bit, a little bit of leg room there, but this driving seat in my position, I've got absolutely loads of leg room. You both get a USB-C port, heated rear seats, and you also have a power outlet in the back as well, 220 volts. Moving on to boot space then, as we'll touch on later in the daily section of the video, you've got a full power tailgate and you have got a huge boot. Just for context, this is I think 20-inch or 21-inch spare wheel. You could fit at least a good 4 flight cases in here. And as we learnt in our last EV review video or hybrid video, really sharp lights, so if you've got a young kid you wouldn't want them to have their head at this height and smack their head into this corner, something I've noticed on 2 cars now. And then it is of course a power tailgate. So lastly then, onto probably the most important seat in the house, the driver's seat. And then in the driver's seat, of course, you've got a huge nav screen which has got CarPlay and Android Auto, but you've also got your driver zone, obviously, for your traditional speedo, rev when you need it, and battery, etc. From a practicality point of view, there are 1,000,001 cubby holes, sunglasses, storage, huge storage in the middle here. This bin goes all the way down because, of course, the battery's in the floor, so there's nothing really under here to prevent you from using the storage. You've got wireless phone charging, and you've also got a traditional cigarette socket charging port there. On the whole then, I really like this interior. It feels light, it feels airy, and generally it just feels very high quality. There are no horrible squeaks or rattles to be spoken of, and all of the materials that you come into contact with and touch, and the door handles for example, all feel really high quality materials. So firstly then, on to our handling and platform section of the review. First thing you've got to note is that this car weighs 2.1 tonnes. It has got electric steering, so there's not a huge amount of feedback to the steering, although once you do get into the lock and you do get into the meat of the corner, it does weighten up a little bit, which is thus far my experience with electric cars. And if you click it into sport mode, you may hear a change in the tone. It does, and the dials start to glow red. It does feel like the steering has a little bit more weight to it. I don't know about that much more feedback, but you can certainly put it where you want. The only real thing to note about the 2023 model year CX-60 is that Mazda have since revised the entire suspension and all of the programming for it as well. 2023 model year owners are to be contacted by their dealerships to have their actual suspension replaced with an entirely new part. Now, I've driven the car a fair amount here in Wales, but I also drove it extensively on the Isle of Wight on some quite twisty country lanes. And I've got to say, it is manageable and does go where you want it to. However, the suspension issue is noticeable, especially if you're a rear passenger. When you go over a bump, it feels like it's completely over-damped. That is obviously an issue that Mazda are aware about and are resolving, but worth noting if you're looking at a 2023 model year car. So to conclude my handling section of this video then, for a 2.1 tonne vehicle, it does handle itself really well. I do think that's due to the battery being low in the platform, so the centre of mass is quite low, which means it is a little bit chuckable when you get to a twisty road. The CX-60 handles perfectly well, in fact surprisingly so for such a heavy car, so I give it a score of 5 out of 10 once it's had the suspension update from Mazda. Nothing wrong at all, but nothing stunning in the bigger picture. Now, onto the performance section. The CX-60 has got a 2.5 litre 4-cylinder engine, petrol, and it's got 17.8 kilowatt-hour battery, augmenting it to 323 brake horsepower, but probably more importantly, 500 newton meters of torque, which, when you want it, is enough. So, worth reviewing then the range on electric only, which on a warm day, I'm told by the owner, a good sort of 35 to 40 odd miles is achievable, especially if you've got some downhill sections and somebody not driving in the middle of the road as they exit a car park. The CX-60 has a 0 to 62 time of just 5.8 seconds, which is very impressive considering the mass. Torque always feels plentiful, and for this reason it gets a score bump up to above average at 6 out of 10. So the last section of the video then is Dailyability, and as I said in my previous review of the new Toyota CHR, which you can see by clicking the pop-out link somewhere in the video, Dailyability in my reviews is all-round. So whereas someone like Doug DeMuro has got several different factors, mine is a score out of 10 for just economy, cheap to run, cheap to insure, how capacious it is, how big the boot is, and generally how good it is as a daily driver. So it's worth noting then that Mazda claims the combined fuel economy on this car is 188-ish miles to the gallon, and then real world driving and real world reviews, it looks like it's anywhere up to about 60 miles to the gallon if you're using it for motorway journeys and some shorter and longer journeys, a bit like this on twistier, slower roads. Insurance then, when we've looked at comparison sites, there's no shock surprises. It looks comparable with other vehicles of this price and this sort of class. Tax for this car is £190, plus obviously the UK supplement for cars that cost in excess of £40,000. So total vehicle excise duty is £590 a year for the first 3 years. Otherwise, in terms of Dailyability, the car is large. It is on par with sort of a Range Rover Velar size, somewhere in between a Velar and a full-fat Range Rover. So there's loads of space in the back. It is a 5-seater, not a 7-seater, but the advantage of that is you get a huge boot and 5 big seats. So check for practicality and sheaves. So then, to conclude the Dailyability section of the video, the car is fantastic, fantastically practical, and out of 10, because that's how we're going to score this section, I would give it probably an 8 or even a 9. Let's go with 8.5, because it is very cheap to run and insure, and I suppose other than tax, which of course will reduce to just £190 a year after the 3-year mark, it is very cheap to run and insure and to use, and it's extremely spacious. So we move on to the fourth and final scoring section, which is pretentiously named the Tiff factor. That X factor, not that X factor, but an X factor that you can't really put your finger on. How much do I desire this car? Remember, this is my opinion, and I like coupes, Italian things, and I'm generally not yet in the market for a spacious and practical vehicle. But I find myself really liking this car. The Mazda Spirit Red paint is fantastic, the build quality is brilliant, the insulation in the cabin is fantastic, and I think once the rear suspension has been resolved, there isn't really anything I dislike about this car. I suppose if I was being completely picky, I would probably have a darker wood in the interior, but I still like this technical bamboo looking type stuff. But the interior quality is a huge plus point for me. And it is for those reasons that I would give it probably a Tiff factor of a strong 7. Remember, this is a scale that at one end may have a Lada and at the other end may have a LaFerrari. So 7 is strong. Soul Crystal Red or something? As I've just been corrected, it's not Spirit Red, it's Crystal Meth Red or something. We'll put the name at the bottom of the screen. And now onto the POV section of the video then. On something with a louder exhaust, I would normally rig up a camera to the tail just so we can get some sound. And I can hear the car bonging at me because it's detected me walking up to it. There we go. So obviously straight in sport mode, away we go. Now we're in this view, I will point out that you can use the paddles on the steering wheel to go into a semi-manual transmission, and sport mode is the only mode that you get a rev counter in. If you have it in normal mode, you can't actually see what revs you're at, so it feels a little bit pointless to me. And also, it immediately jumps back to just a regular drive mode if you don't use the pedals. There we go. It really likes a high gear as well. We're not even at 40 miles an hour and it's shifted itself up to 5th there, 4th before. Once you're in sport mode, it is fairly responsive, but I think most people are going to find themselves driving just in an automatic drive mode most of the time. You can return to automatic just by pressing and holding the upshift button, and you go straight back into drive. Now, bearing in mind this is the Black Mountain Road, as we've reviewed the previous car on, and we'll review the next car on, and the speed limit is only 40 miles an hour, mainly because it's ridden with sheep. Hopefully this short POV section also gives you some sense of how refined it is, how quiet it is, and how the only real sound is perhaps a little bit of wind noise rushing over the wing mirrors. Certainly for something with such big tyres, there's very little tyre roar and road noise, which is certainly impressive. Okay, so concluding the video then, there will be new shock absorbers, I imagine, at some point in the near future. The speed bump was a paid actor. But I really like this car, and I think actually as a practical all-round car, if you're going to have one car, it is brilliant at doing the job. I really would recommend it. I love this colour, I love the interior, I love the efficiency. I do think it is a great car. The question we asked at the start of the video, is it worth, well, the 2024 models now have a price tag, I think you can spec them up in excess of £50,000. Is it worth that? I mean, I've sat in some Range Rovers at car shows where it says the price tag is near £200,000, and it doesn't feel 4 times more special or more spacious or more brilliant than this. So for me, yes, I would say it's probably worth it. And again, because it's a plug-in hybrid vehicle, there's probably some kind of company car tax relief money saving to be had in that aspect. If you're buying it privately, I suppose that's just a decision that you have to make. But ultimately, I really like this car and I really like how refined it is. Thank you very much for watching. Do tune in for another review next week, and I'll see you again very soon. Ciao! The CX-60 is our new leader on the new review table, with a decent overall score of 66.25%. By this format, a car should score at least 50% overall to be worth considering. But remember, this is all just my opinion, and the Tiff Score is of course my very biased view of how much I personally desire a car.